Hello, everybody. So, quiet. May I have your attention? So I think it's just so great that there's this much dialogue in this room. And for me, it's just a sign of how wonderful this course is and how it really brings together. Okay, I'll sit and shout. Okay, so welcome everybody. I'm so happy there was so much conversation in the room to start. Welcome to the Civic Lab Toronto session focused on arts, culture, and community resilience. As this meeting is both in person and virtual, and we are not all gathered on the same space, I recognize that this land acknowledgement may not be for the territory where you are currently located. We ask that if this is the case, you acknowledge the traditional territories that you are currently on and the treaty peoples of that place. So for those of us who are in Toronto, I would like to acknowledge that the land we are on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississauga of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is also now home to many, many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississauga of the Credit. Today, we are discussing the importance of arts and culture to this city, and Indigenous culture is fundamental to understanding this place, its history, and its current opportunities and inhabitants. A trip to the Spirit Garden, now open in Nathan Phillips Square, is a testimony without words to the power of Indigenous creative traditions. So I am Dr. Sarah Diamond. I am President Emerita OCAD University and now OCAD University Research Chair. I am so excited about this session, which focuses on arts and culture, including the cultural industries and the public realm. It follows appropriately right after the City of Toronto's October launch of Culture Connects, an action plan for culture in Toronto, a 10-year plan, and Sidewalks to Skyline, an action plan for Toronto's economy, equally a decade of planning. These complement the city's 10-year public arts strategy. So as a former OCAD University president, I can't help but emphasize the value of these plans and the actions that they engender, creating pathways to retain the next generation of talent in the city to build a powerful cultural economy that attracts tourists, builds social cohesion, strengthens neighborhoods and individual well-being, and understanding that culture is a significant economic driver. We'll hear more about the themes of the cultural plan, which I quote, culture everywhere, culture for all, culture for the future, and culture beyond our borders, unquote. I'm a passionate believer in the value of public art to enliven neighborhoods, and I have my little I love public art button on, to enliven neighborhoods, create beauty and identity. Having co-chaired Toronto's Artworks TO Year of Public Art, which brought art to malls, buildings, and parks everywhere. And I also chaired the External Advisory Committee for Nuit Blanche, which I know many of you attended, a 12-hour public art festival. So I chaired that from 2007 to 2023. A reminder to any tuning in for the first time that Civic Lab Toronto curriculum is presented by Strategic Partnerships and the City Manager's Office within the City of Toronto in collaboration with the 8 higher education institutions represented here today. So a lot of planning between the academic institutions and the City of Toronto has gone into delivering the CivicLabTO curriculum. And the City of Toronto has secured an amazing lineup of senior staff and policy experts for each of the sessions. So thank you to all our partners for making this possible. And a little bird came and whispered in my ear and told me that our final class together, which is in 2 weeks, there may be a very special guest. So I'm going to encourage all of you to show up, please, physically in the room, even those who are online out there. So there you go. Before I pass it on to our guest for today's session, I need to cover a few housekeeping items. The session is being recorded and participants are asked not to share any personal information within the meeting. This session will be available on www.CivicLabTO.ca or the curriculum. We know that as faculty members, we get this out to you thanks to the city within the week and made available to your instructor. If you have joined us in this committee room, welcome, and note that we ask that you avoid joining the virtual WebEx webinar so we don't have feedback. The washrooms are located in the hallways out that way. There's a set on the right, set on the left. And there will be time for Q&A at the end of today's session. If you are joining virtually and would like to submit a question, please enter it into the Q&A feature at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, and it will be sent to me. If you are joining us in person and are sitting in the council members' chair, well, you're not, you're in committee room, you may speak into the built-in microphones. To use the mics, press the speaking button, so it's on your left on the microphone to activate the mic. Once your question is asked, press the speaking button again to mute yourself. We also have a wireless microphone which can be brought to your seat. Raise your hand and someone from the team will come to you. We remind you to avoid disclosing any personal information when asking your questions. So we're going to hear today from a wonderful, wonderful, talented group of speakers. Aderonke Akande, who's the Director of Arts and Culture Services, Economic Development and Culture. Then Katrina Cambatelli, the Public Art Officer, Economic Development and Culture. And then Marguerite Pigot, who is Film Commissioner and Director of Entertainment Industries, Economic Development and Culture. Then we have two OCAD University students. We have Zenaida Desravanes and Nora Tunjavadi, thank you. And they will be thanking our guests and saying a few words. So off we go. Thank you, everybody. And we're going to start with Aderonke Akande. Over to you.
Okay, thank you so much, Sarah, and thank you, everyone. I don't know, sorry. Are you able to hear me through the mic? I guess should be the first question. All right, wonderful. So really pleased to be here this morning. Thanks for the opportunity to talk a bit about the city's action plan for culture. So I'm Aderonke Akande, Director of Arts and Culture Services, and of course I'm going to speak to you about the plan, but I just thought it would be good in a room of students to give just a little bit of context about myself. So my pathway here is through multiple roads, or pass through multiple roads. So I'm an urban planner, I'm a project management professional, and I worked in arts and culture, in theater and film, and in arts education for over 15 years. I've been with the city for the past 13 years and had the pleasure, as you know, to apply my planning in a social and community context, really looking at ways to address communities facing challenge and change all across the city. And community has been a big theme in the work that I do, whether it's policy or programs, all of that pinning towards and pointing towards action being critical. So all those themes I think are relevant to the work that I have the pleasure of doing now in terms of working with Arts and Culture Services and birthing this culture plan with many, many great people that did the work to bring us here. I'm relatively new to the role, so this has been my task since starting with EDC last December. So next slide. So Culture Connects, an action plan for culture in Toronto. And the first question you might ask is why? Why are we doing this? And you know, what is our central driver? Well, we can start from an economic standpoint. Culture is really significant. It's a contributor to the city's GDP to the tune of $8.4 billion and creates almost 150,000 jobs. So there's that point of impact and influence, but the heart piece, I think, is equally or even more critical and significant. The city has had a culture plan, a 10-year plan that was adopted in 2011, creative capital gains. But many of those actions have largely been achieved, and as I said, it was a 10-year plan. We've also noted, moving out from the COVID pandemic, that the culture sector has really been experiencing a challenge, facing crises of a number of different natures. So a crisis in terms of access to space or losing cultural space. Affordability has been a challenge. Understanding and adapting to technological changes, sustainability in the sector, and the role and connection to equity and access. So all factors that we looked at and heard about, and that brought us to grasping this new plan. And the culture plan, really, we see a way of connecting with residents and connecting residents to culture, connecting the sector to Torontonians, all in a way to create a vibrant, inclusive city. Next slide. So just a little bit about the framing. So the action plan for culture in Toronto is a 10-year vision, ambitious 10-year vision for how culture works, looks and plays out in the city. It's captured within 4 priority areas, and those encompass 28 actions, excuse me. So culture everywhere, culture for all, culture for the future, and culture beyond our borders. So those are our 4 priority areas. Next slide. In framing this, we recognize that there are really 2 fields of play. There's probably more, but 2 really critical fields of play. One, the immediate, things that urgently need to be addressed. And you know, I provided some framing in terms of the current state of many aspects of the sector, or some aspects of the sector in terms of the crisis. So the need for immediate action was clear. And so urgent actions are part of our framing, as well as long-term, more transformational actions looking at bringing systemic change. That also captures an awareness, and we speak about this in the plan. We don't know all of the aspects that one might need in 5 years or 7 years or 9 years. So we need to design the plan in a way that it can take in those new opportunities, address those new concerns as they come up. Progress will be monitored as we move forward in many ways. Just alluded to some here in terms of an online dashboard, but also a new event, a Mayor's Cultural Summit, which we will start in 2025, and I'll speak more to that in a moment. Next slide. So let me just provide some framing. When you come forward with this type of larger plan or action plan or policy in a municipal context, the process I think is helpful to understand. Community engagement was a key part. We worked with monumental projects and were really privileged to have input from over 4,000 residents. We tackled this in a number of ways, and you'll hear that when you hear about community engagement on different projects. Town halls, we also had artist-led engagement sessions in different manners, focus groups and online surveys. So getting the voices of both those, those who work in the sector, those who experience culture in various ways, those who live and work and play in Toronto is a key part of coming to a plan. We also worked with U of T School of Cities, providing us with support and partnership in terms of our research. So looking at trends in the sector, economic indicators, and helping us to develop an outcomes framework. We also looked at other jurisdictions, who's doing what in the realm of culture that would be a great inspiration for us. And finally, we worked with an external advisory panel chaired by Councillor Shelley Carroll, so the budget chief and a champion of arts and culture and economic development in the city, as well as Maxine Bailey, Executive Director of the Canadian Film Centre. So there, a number of meetings with a dedicated group that's really giving us feedback and advice based on their experiences in the sector and validating the directions for the plan. Next slide. So, what is our vision? Where do we expect Toronto? What are we trying to aim for in the next 10 years? So Toronto will be a city where everyone can discover, create, and experience culture. That's kind of our guiding vision for going forward. I will say that when we struck the vision, we also spoke about and set guiding principles that underpin all of the work, the priorities, and the actions that we lay out. There are 5 of those: centering Indigenous culture and creativity, prioritizing equity and access, championing arts, creatives and creative industries, attracting and building for audiences, fostering innovation, and enabling creativity. So you'll see that these echo some of the issues that I laid out in the beginning in terms of concerns that were brought to us. And the 4 priorities, which I've mentioned before, are just highlighted there. Next slide. So to make this sort of come to ground, we set targets within each of the priority areas. In Culture Everywhere, which really speaks to space and access to cultural space across the city, we set a target of 1 million square feet of new cultural space in the city. So that's what we're laying out. In 10 years, that's where we'll be. Culture for All, we set a target that really speaks to something that we heard a lot in our engagement and consultation. People said they were interested in culture, they wanted to increase their, be more active in cultural experiences, but access, they felt like it was hard to access. They wanted more experiences close to them. So we took that as our guide for the target here. Every resident has access to at least one free cultural experience in their neighborhood supported by the city each month. So there are 150 neighborhoods. That may be a reason why the other half of my hair went gray, but that's our 10-year commitment. Culture for the Future, this is where we really are looking at how do we address, set the sector for the next 10 years. So that's addressing some of the stability pieces, but also looking at transformation and change, innovation, how all those things move forward. So there we're talking about a financial investment of $35 million over the next 10 years to help to retain and also reimagine culture in the city. And Culture Beyond Our Borders really looks at us waving our flag again as a great global creative capital. So there we're looking at ways that we can bring new exchange projects to the city. So creative export, excuse me, creative export and artist exchange. So really highlighting Canadian Torontonians who are excellent in their field. Next slide. I won't go deep in this, being mindful of time, but this just gives a flavor of some of the actions underneath each of the priority areas. So I spoke to space, I spoke to the commitment of new cultural space. Equally important, or maybe even more important, is protecting and retaining current cultural spaces and taking actions to help to stave off more loss. So that is certainly captured within the actions within Culture for All, looking at diversity and equity within our granting, within how we look at programming, and also looking at how do we make cultural experiences more known to people. So discoverability is an aspect of that. Culture for the future, I spoke to some of these items, but really investing in transformative sector-wide initiatives, but also they're collecting and sharing our story. So collecting data is a key piece, and sharing the story of what are we doing within our cultural sector? How is that going? You know, waving our flag a bit when it's fantastic, flagging some of the concerns when we come up around against them. And culture beyond our borders, how do we leverage large-scale events to help to boost cultural tourism? Next slide. So all this is, as you can imagine, a lot, 28 actions over 4 priority areas. So we wanted to make sure that we kind of had a real focus and we're clear about what are we doing right out of the gate. So what does year 1 look like? And there we really are touching on 2 themes, invest and connect. So when we talk about invest, we're talking about increased funding to the Toronto Arts Council, directly supporting artists and arts organizations. We talk about indexing cultural grants to inflation. We talk about investment in sector capacity building initiatives, both not-for-profit organizations and for the creative industries. And then what does connect mean? Well, they were really talking about, as I mentioned, this connecting people to each other within the sector and connecting the cultural sector and cultural experiences to residents. People really spoke about the loss of opportunities to connect. Those working in the sector spoke about that a lot in our consultation. So here we're launching an inaugural Mayor's Cultural Summit in 2025. That's an opportunity for peer-to-peer conversation, but and as well, an opportunity for us to report on how we're doing. What are we finding? Where are we going? You know, where are we on the trajectory with these actions? Which is very important, to put together a culture plan and then to never to go disappear and come back 10 years later and say, here's how we did. That doesn't make sense. So we've built into our process that sharing. Also, opportunities for connectivity and engagement at neighborhood levels, and there I'll flag investments in our local arts service organizations, which really help to support arts and culture outside of the core. Next slide. So I mentioned the sort of second plane of play or second field of play, which is our longer term transformational actions. I just wanted to provide a few here to give a sense of what exactly does that mean. So when we think about our Culture Everywhere priority, one of the longer term actions talks about alternative models for cultural space. So both how we might own cultural spaces, but also how they might operate. Looking at new ways to move forward with partnerships as a method for example, promoting, but also funding some of the cultural endeavors that may be part of going forward. And also establishing in a deep way and seeding and then sustaining support for organizations experiencing change. Next slide. So not an area where I'm going to go deep, but just wanted to give a flavor of some of the pieces that we look to or will look to as a way of measuring how we're doing in the 4 priority areas. That measurement, evaluation, and learning is a key piece, and we're building that into an outcomes framework. We're also going to share that out via an online dashboard. Sharing the narrative, I think, is a key piece. So understanding the story of where things are, but also sharing that story so that across different parts of the sector, across different parts of the city, we can continue to speak to each other about what's great about where we are, what's working about where we are culturally, what's fun about where we are culturally. Let's not forget that culture is about fun too. And I also mentioned, you know, another component there in terms of these indicators will be captured in that Mayor's Cultural Summit. So that's the plan in a nutshell. I think, sorry, next slide, and just throw it back to you. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you. It's so exciting to see the plan roll out, and in my current role, which is chair of the Toronto Arts Foundation, we're the partner organization to the Toronto Arts Council, and the commitment, which is so significant, of $2 million a year over 5 years, so that's $10 million going into the cultural sector, we really believe will have a phenomenal impact. And as the foundation that raises money from philanthropists and sponsors, that public investment is incredible leverage, because that's how it works. So thank you for all the incredible work you did on that and how transformational it in fact will be. So we're now going to move on to Katerina Campitelli, Public Art Officer, Economic Development and Culture. Over to you.
Good morning, everybody. Let me just set my timers because I could talk about public art all day. We can go straight to the second slide. So as Sarah introduced, my name is Katerina Campitelli. I'm a public art officer with the City of Toronto. I joined the city in 2015, so I've been there for almost 10 years, with taking 1 year of sabbatical to finish my master's studies. The entire time I've been within the culture division, so some of my highlights. Within the culture division, I wasn't always in the same role. So I started in the public galleries unit, where I organize international exhibitions with Albania and Japan. I moved to the grants section and co-created the first cultural festivals grant. I worked for the cultural events team and organized CivicLabTO, which was a series of art projections during the pandemic. We partnered with a bunch of organizations such as OCAD and the Bentway, and it created a lot of opportunity for emerging artists during a troubling time where there weren't a lot of commissions. Then I moved over to ArtworksTO, Toronto's Year of Public Art, where I was the partnerships project lead, essentially producing 250 temporary public artworks. And in the same role, I also led the Public Art of Tomorrow Summit, which was co-produced with the province of Quebec. I've also done Nuit Blanche projects, and all of this kind of led to my current role in the Public Art Office. The Public Art Office is my home. It's where all of my experience was leading me, but I am telling you this because if you hear Aderonke speak, and myself and Marguerite, you're like, those are cool jobs, but none of them are for me. There are so many roles within our culture division, and there might be a spot for you. So in my current role with the Public Art Office, my job is to commission new permanent public artworks for public spaces. So this is new parks, new community centers, new bridges, roadways, any sort of new public space that has capital investment. And I help select the artists and lead that project from inception all the way to installation and completion. And at the same time, I also manage the Toronto Sculpture Garden, which is a permanently temporary exhibition space. Our exhibitions normally change over every 6 months or so. And it's a really good opportunity for artists to get a sense of working in public space in a short timeline. So to date, I've commissioned over 400 temporary public artworks and 9 permanent monuments, landmarks, and public artworks on behalf of the City of Toronto. Another part of my job is writing plans and policies that go to City Council. One of such was the Public Art Strategy Implementation Plan that I'll speak more in depth on in just a moment. And I've stuck these two photos up here to just demonstrate that there's no such thing as an average day in my life. One day I'll be on 4 different news channels across the country unveiling a new artwork, and the next day I will be decked out in protective equipment standing in a literal hole that will one day be a TTC station in the future. I also work out of architects' offices, artist studios, fabricator studios. I have meetings in parks, construction sites, on bridges. There's just no such thing as a normal day. Next slide, please. So when I tell you that the Public Art Office is my home, and it was a full circle moment, it's also because I did my master's thesis on how the City of Toronto can leverage its public art collection for international relations, economic development, and tourism. So with these examples on screen here, these are public art and public spaces, and they are well known for tourists around the world. In Paris, the Burin Columns, and in Chicago, the Bean or Cloud Gate. If you are a business, you want to set up around these spots because you know you're going to get hordes of tourists every day. In New York City, the Statue of Liberty, it's a monument, it's a gift, but when it comes down to it, it is a sculpture. And as Marguerite might mention in a moment, these are the kinds of areas that films and TV shows want to shoot next to. So there's more opportunity for economic development. In Rio de Janeiro, the Copacabana tiles are not necessarily a public artwork, but they are an iconic public space initiative that's known throughout the world. And there's plenty more examples of this. There's the Wynwood Walls in Miami, the Louvre Pyramid, Lisbon's Mural District, the Trevi Fountain, and the Golden Hands Bridge in Da Nang, Vietnam. So all of this said, I was really focused on how Toronto could be looking internationally when building our public spaces. One of my favorite examples is the partnership between the city of Mississauga and Korea, Japan. They're friendship cities, and in order to solidify their partnership, Japan installed a Mississauga Park and Mississauga installed a Korea Park. Korea spelled K-A-R-I-Y-A, not Korea, for the city in Japan. So this park in Mississauga is complete with cherry blossoms and public art that were designed by members of the city. So this project not only solidified their bond as sister cities, but Mississauga is now home to 99 Japanese companies that contribute to the local economy. So Toronto has so many friendship cities, like, could we do something similar with this? Could we have one of our beaches designed by an artist from Rio de Janeiro? Could we have an Italian artist from one of our many Italian friendship cities do an artwork for Corso Italia? However, when I completed my master's research, it was about 6 months before the global pandemic. Next slide, please. And there was a tangible shift from looking internationally to looking locally. What do residents want to see in their neighborhood rather than what would tourists want to go visit? So these are 2 examples of projects I worked on during the pandemic years. The first is the Little Portugal Rooster. As Aderonke mentioned, there's 158 official neighborhoods in Toronto. This one only works in Little Portugal. You can't pick this up and move this to another neighborhood. It has to do with the community's cultural ties and backgrounds. It makes the local community feel at home. And it's also a wayfinding device. Whenever I attend Do West Fest or Ozfest, I hear people say, just meet me at the Rooster. So it's really interesting to see public art playing such an important role. The other is a picture of The Heights by Brandon Vickard. We installed this last year, but we're still finishing up the lighting, the plaque, the landscaping. And it's a partial reconstruction of the Elias Schoolhouse, which actually stood on this exact site. It was one of the first settlements in this area of Toronto at Keele and Finch, and it was taken down to make room for more development. But the fact that this sculpture is a landmark to that site, you can't put this public artwork in another city. You can't put it in another country. You can't even pick it up and move it 2 blocks in any direction and have it make sense. It has to be at this exact intersection. So I love the site specificity of it and that it has to connect to this community. Next slide, please. This is a piece we just installed a couple weeks ago. It's called Campfire. It's by artists Michael Belmore and Herman Mejia. It's located just south of Palace Pier and just west of the Humber Bay Bridge. This project involved a lot of community consultation and engagement. During the competition process, we held pop-up events in the local libraries. Residents could join Zoom meetings with the artists to answer their questions. And then once Herman and Michael were selected, they did all kinds of engagement with the community as well. By the time we had commissioned this piece, I was getting emails all the time from community members being like, when is it going to be installed? And I had to say, like, we're fabricating it, it's in process, it's coming. And now I get emails every week saying, we love this piece so much. Every time I go there, there's people doing photo shoots in front of it, and it's just really heartwarming. And we made the front page of the Toronto Star, which was also very, very nice, because sometimes we're told that people don't want to write about the arts anymore, so this was really, really that much sweeter. Next slide, please. This is a project that's in progress. It's one of my favorite projects. It is on Overlea Boulevard, so near Thorncliffe Park and Flemington Park. This area of the city is a public art desert. There's not a lot of investment there presently, but we did have the opportunity, to revitalize an 800-meter stretch of the Overlea Boulevard and the bridge. Most of our competitions are done through it's a competitive process in order to determine the artwork. So Rhoda Medhat in the competition was one of the shortlisted artists. He essentially plotted the demographic information of this neighborhood on a map of the world, and he discovered that a lot of the people that live there come from countries that were part of the original Silk Road. So he liked the idea of connecting to this Silk Road and to tapestries bringing people together. So his proposal was a sculpture called Kilim, and it's based on that tapestry that connects the area. Next slide, please. So we could have left that the way it was and put a new sculpture there, but then Dita, the architect for the bridge, came on board and said, we can collaborate, we can do something more with this. So as you'll see in kind of like the top right, it's not very clear right now, there's another sculpture there of the carpets hanging over the side of the parapet, and we're gonna have one of those on each of the 4 sides of the bridge. And then additionally, there's 2 lookouts on the bridge so that you can look over the beautiful ravine looking south. And the architect asked Rhoda to design the lookouts. So the design of the paver is now the same tapestry pattern that can be found in the sculptures. So again, there's not a lot of present investment and public art in this neighborhood, but we didn't just decide to add public art. We're creating a unique and welcoming public space, and we're creating a distinct visual identity for the neighborhood. Next slide, please. I decided to throw this list of people that are involved in a public art project up here. If you're not an artist or a curator or a project manager, there's so many other roles you can take and be involved in a project like this. If you'd rather go into urban planning or public consultation or welding, you can still be a part of a project like this. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to speak a bit about the way the city is divided for public art. We are actually 3 different divisions that look after public art. My division is, of course, economic development and culture. We own the public art and monuments collection. We commission, as I said, public artwork for public specific spaces. We also manage donations, and we are funded through construction projects. So all of my projects relate to a construction budget. I have to put public art. If the construction is of a bridge, I have to put public art on that bridge, under that bridge, or very close to that bridge. I can't just pick up my construction budget and move it somewhere else in the city that needs more public art. City planning has a sort of similar role to us, except they focus with private property and developer projects, and they're funded through developers. And then finally, transportation services is the owner of Street Art Toronto, which began as a graffiti management plan. So they focus mostly on murals, and they are funded through operating dollars. So 3 different divisions, 3 different methods of funding. Next slide, please. But we all work together with the public art strategy in mind. The public art strategy was passed in 2013 through council, based on 21 actions with the vision of creativity and community everywhere. I've put some links here that you can go to the council decisions if you want more resources. Next slide. It all began in 2017 with Dr. Sarah Diamond and some of her colleagues when they put forward this essay about redefining public art in Toronto. That led to the public art strategy, as I said, passed through council in November 2019. To launch the strategy, we had ArtWorks.TO, Toronto's Year of Public Art, from 2021 to 2022. And we also had an evaluation report at the end of that where we spoke to thousands of Torontonians and community arts organizations for what needs to change in the city's public art. Last year, the Public Art Strategy Implementation Plan went to council last December, and this essentially divides the next 10 years into 3 bite-sized chunks. So right now we're in 2024 to 2026, and then we're going to report back every 3 to 4 years with new priorities as they come up. Next slide, please. So in this first phase of the Public Art Strategy Implementation Plan, we have 11 actions. I'm not going to get into every single one, so you can check out the council decision. But some of the themes are making sure there's more people involved in the public art collection. So items number 1, 5, and 6 talk about mentorship, increasing diversity in the collection, and having Indigenous artists co-create more public art. And item number 11 is in regards to the new CBC policy for developer projects. Originally, public art for developer projects was given 1% of the entire project. Now it's 4%, but we have to split it up with parks and libraries and community centers and heritage and preservation and a bunch of other community values, but it significantly reduces the amount of funding for public art. Next slide, please. So this is what my team's working on right now. We have 67 ongoing public art commissions. This is a 20% increase of public artworks over the existing collection, which will be installed over the next 5 years. 41% of these projects are Indigenous art projects. Some of those are deliberate Indigenous projects with Indigenous stakeholder groups and curators. Some of them were open competitions where an Indigenous artist just happened to have the best proposal for the site. 38% of the ongoing public art projects are female artists. They're still quite lacking in that department. And 65% of the ongoing projects are artists of color. Next slide, please. This is to show the expansion of the collection and where it physically resides. So the top row is the existing collection, and you can tell that a lot of the public artwork is installed in Toronto, East York, as opposed to the other boroughs. Again, relating to that's where capital construction and developments happen to have historically been. The lower line is our ongoing and upcoming projects. You can tell that there's a lot more development happening in Etobicoke and North York. Our team only has 1 project in Scarborough. Luckily, we're putting in 4 different public artworks on that one site, but again, it just relates to the fact that we can't pick up our construction budgets and move them to somewhere else. Next slide. And Sarah asked us this time to speak a little bit about the challenges that we go through in our work. So the first one that I would highlight is working with other levels of government. There's a video going on here that might load, but if not, you can look at it in your own time. The Ontario government and creating of the Ontario line has derailed a lot of projects in our office. One of them was to remove a monument at Queen and University. We were not given a lot of notice, but there's obviously a lot of things that have to happen with removing a major monument, like environmental assessments and condition reports and insurance, appraisals, all the kinds of things that you can't exactly turn over in a month's time. So they did do a really good job of putting a video that explains the work together, but the monument's going to be in a storage facility in Scarborough for the next 8 to 10 years until we can reinstall it. Other issues with the Ontario line have been that if we have a project nearby the construction of a new subway stop, our projects are automatically placed on hold. So if we had something that was going to be installed in 2026, it's now looking like it's going to be installed in 2030 something. And again, I'm not condemning we obviously need new transit and more transit opportunities in the city. It's just that sometimes working with other levels of government can be challenging because our projects are not prioritized and we're often not given a lot of notice when these things happen. Another challenge that we encounter is a lack of resources. Our collection is growing rapidly and it is aging. We have over 400 pieces in there. We don't have the resources to match. Some of our older pieces are fountains that require quite a bit of investment, and there's a limit of how many pieces we can work on every single year. Another resource is our staff and our staff hours. We have a tiny team of 3 people, and we manage the preservation of 400 public artworks and those 60+ new commissions. And if you think of each of those new commissions as a different artist, it's a different project team, it's different site plans, it's different mutings, it's different engineering drawings. There's quite a lot of work tied into each of those projects. And then I'll just say that being told that the arts don't matter comes up quite a bit. Sometimes when you're installing a new artwork, they say, well, this could have gone to public health funding or something like that, which isn't necessarily the way things work. And even when I was talking about the Toronto Star article, it felt so nice to have that element of, no, people do want to hear about the arts. It is important to them. Next slide. So I'm going to wrap things up by just talking about the benefits of public art. This is one of my favorite pieces in the city's collection. It's not something I commissioned, but it's the Huron Lanterns by Figureground, who's Jillian Lee. Take the time to read through the benefits of public art. I've mentioned plenty in this presentation already, like wayfinding and economic development and tourism. But if you think of a project like this, if you're walking home late at night, would you rather walk down this street or the adjacent street? You're probably going to choose this one because there's going to be more people around and it's going to be lighter and brighter. If you're a business, would you want to set up shop on this street where there's going to be a lot of people traffic, or would you rather set up on an adjacent street? So just reinforcing that the public art also builds creative cities, and it helps promote Toronto as a center for arts and culture. Thank you.
Thank you so much for, such a thorough overview of how public art works in the city, what the successes are and what some of the challenges are. And I'm sure that we will have some great questions from the students as we move forward. So Marguerite, over to you. Looking forward to hear about cultural industries, which is the whole other side of this story. So thank you.
Yep, thank you very much. So I'll be speaking with you about film and creative industries today. So next slide, please. So I think I want to start off by clarifying terms. What are the creative industries? Creative industries are industries that are founded in creativity, but that leverage that creativity for job growth and for economic development. So it is where creativity and commerce meet. I've often in my career, whether it was in theater or in film or television, I think of it as where creativity and audience meet. And it's where creativity meets other industries, because we're developing technologies here that are used in engaging people in creative experiences, but that are also used in other industries, whether it's healthcare or other things like that. So in terms of Toronto and creative industries, right now you can see the list of the industries we are currently identifying as creative industries. That's under review, and that may change with the study that we're doing going forward. So next slide, please. So why do creative industries matter? Well, in Economic Development and Culture's Strategic Directions report done by PwC, these industries were prioritized for investment because they are high growth and because they index above average with regard to inclusion of equity-deserving people in key roles. They also leverage two of Toronto's key strengths. Toronto is hugely strong as a creative hub globally, and we'll talk about that, but it's also really strong as a tech hub. And so it leverages these two things. The creative industries are where our two great strengths meet. The industries that we identify as creative industries in Toronto right now have an annual economic input, conservatively expressed, of $13 billion. And over 100,000 jobs, and many of those jobs are unionized, particularly in television and film, but also in hospitality. And so while generating jobs and investment and vibrancy, they also, create a vibe that makes Toronto, Toronto, and that attracts and retains talent here. So there really is, in creative industries, a triple bottom line. They create a creative good, an economic good, and a social good. Next slide, please. So film and entertainment industries have, which is the section I lead in economic development and culture, which really needs to be renamed film and creative industries, because entertainment industries are not a thing. They have never been a thing. They're never going to be a thing. I don't know how that happened. This was before me. Anyway, we'll fix it. We have the film office, the music office, the Office of Creative Technology, and the visitor economy. And the challenge that my team and I have, which is an intriguing one intellectually and creatively, is to leverage each of these industries so that they are stronger than the sum of their parts. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk about, I'll eventually talk about what we do in terms of sector development, because that's principally how we support these industries, is through sector development. But I wanted to talk about our approach to sector development first. So number one, we work in close collaboration with the industry. We are very guided by these industries. We have advisory boards. We have the Toronto Film, Television and Digital Media Board. We have the Toronto Music Advisory Board. When we do projects related to workforce development, we do those with the unions, the employers, and community groups, and so on. So we're very embedded in the industry. We prioritize equity, diversity, and inclusion in everything we do. When we think about what we do to support these industries, we're very careful in thinking about making a contribution that is unique to us and that doesn't compete with any of our stakeholders. So we focus on doing what the city can do, specifically the city, as opposed to the province, the feds, or industry. We also leverage city assets to create benefits for these industries. So you heard Katrina talk a lot about that, leveraging whether it's city planning or transportation or other divisions. We do a lot of that as well, in addition to land use or actual land, working with the city's agency partners and so on. So we work especially with Destination Toronto, with Toronto Global, with the Office of Climate and Environment, with city planning. These are just some of the things that we interface with regularly. So next, I'm going to go into each one of these industry verticals in a bit more specific. So next slide, please. We'll start with the film industry. So the film industry in 2022 had a direct economic spend in the City of Toronto of $2.6 billion. So that is just spend on production. That is not induced, that's just direct. And the city employs 35,000 people, mostly in unionized jobs. We are the 5th largest film and television production hub in North America. And this year, in 2024, the US publication Movie Maker magazine named Toronto the #1 city in which to live and work as a movie maker. So that's a pretty big industry and a pretty big set of achievements right there. Those are just some of the titles that have been produced in this city. So how does the city support the film industry? Next slide, please. One of the key ways we do it, I'll just take you back in time a little bit. A number of years ago, 2019, 2020, Toronto was going through a huge production boom, and because we knew that we needed more studio space, and a lot of international studio developers were coming here buying land, setting up builds and all of that. So we knew studio space was going to increase. We did a study and we found out that studio space was going to increase by 60% over 5 years. And so we used that study to figure out exactly how much more workforce we would need, and based on the typology of those studios, in what roles. Then we did a study on barriers to access for people who are Black, Indigenous, or people of color to the film industry, so that we could design workforce development programs for real jobs that we knew the industry was going to need, that bore in mind barriers that people face, and we work directly with unions and community groups to implement those workforce development programs. So that's just one of the ways that we have supported the film industry. We also promote the jurisdiction to draw international business to Toronto. So of that 2.6 billion, or of our production volume total any year, about 70% of that is from the US. That business can go absolutely anywhere. Our biggest competitors are Vancouver, Georgia, LA, obviously. Ireland's kind of picking up, and so on. So these jobs really can go anywhere. So we work very aggressively with missions to LA that the mayor leads, with the budget chief and the chair of the film board. So there's a lot of support from city government for bringing that industry here. We also support the growth of studio infrastructure itself, because prior to the pandemic, every year we were turning away well over $100 million worth of business because we didn't have enough studio space. And yeah, the other stuff that you see there, trying to work to make the industry more green. We've installed power drops so that people don't have to use diesel generators and things like that. So that's part of the value offering to the film industry. Now I'm going to talk about music a little bit. So on to the next slide, please. So this is such a limited number. So music venues alone in the city of Toronto, just live music venues, generate $850 million annually and produce 10,500 full-time equivalent jobs. But that's just live music venues. 90% of the music publishing revenue generated in Canada is generated in Ontario, and the bulk of that is in Toronto. So that $850 million is just one small piece of the music pie. It's just difficult to get these numbers kind of geo-gated for a city. We have 18,000 creators here, music artists here, and we're home to headquarters of the industry in English Canada with all the major labels and event promoters and so on. And Toronto is one of the leading North American destinations for large music acts when they tour, obviously. And we're looking forward to welcoming Taylor Swift, whether you like her or not. I'm delighted she's coming, and she's very welcome. So I want to move on to the next slide, please, how the city supports the music sector. One of the reasons why we focus on live music venues is because they are the cornerstone of the industry. They're how artists get discovered. It's how they kind of become ready for larger and larger venues. They're absolutely essential. So we do a lot of work to protect these venues in Toronto, because demand for real estate in Toronto is very high. All the developers are flipping legacy venues into condos in multiple occasions, so there are constant challenges there. So we offer a few key assets that you can see here on the slide to protect access to space for music. We also create new space for music through all of these programs here, the Amplified Live Music on Patios program, through Night Economy, which actually went through zoning and licensing to create more space for performance. So in restaurants, for example, floor space for performance goes from 6% to 25% with this change to policy. That's more space for music. So that's just a few of the things. Oh, look at that, next slide, there's more that we do to support the music sector. We also do artist development with regard to the music sector. So we support paid performances all across the city, but particularly with City Hall Live. We link it to tourism by doing, YYZ Live, and we've got live music at Billy Bishop as well. So we're welcoming people to Toronto as our music city, blanketing the city in QR codes that you may have seen saying love music in front of key venues so that people can kind of dive in. And we have gotten data back from some of these music venues saying, this is how many people have seen these QR codes and shown up here because of that. So now I'm going to move on to creative technology in Toronto, which is another really important office that we have in film and entertainment industries. So again, with regard to creative technology, I want to start by clarifying terms. So video game development and publishing, VR, AR, XR, immersive, and esports. Something that I find interesting to remember when it comes to creative technologies is when you think about how big the film and television industry is in the world, and especially in the US, the video game industry is bigger. Its annual grosses are much larger than those for film and television. And there are all kinds of reasons to support this industry, which I'll discuss in a little bit in terms of its cross-cutting advantages. But just so you get a sense of its home in Toronto, Toronto is the second largest tech cluster. As we've discussed, one of the biggest creative hubs. So it's perfectly positioned to succeed in these industries. 300 companies here. I'll leave the data with you, but one of the data points here that I find most interesting is that 87% of the revenue these companies derive is from export. This is creative entrepreneurship that's happening here. This is, from Toronto to the world. The world comes to Toronto, we know that. Toronto is the most diverse city in the world, but the things that we make here in Toronto, the movies, the films, the music, the video games, whatever it is, this is pushing that out into the world. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how the city supports creative tech. So last year, the city developed an esports strategy. We learned through consultation with the industry that if we really wanted to grow video game development, what we would need to do is actually start by growing esports. Esports is hugely powerful in the world of tourism, and it's actually seen by Destination Toronto as one of the industries that they really need to focus on in order to create growth for tourism and hospitality. So we developed an esports strategy in partnership with Destination Toronto, and we've been very successful at going out and getting very large events like Call of Duty and things like that Valorant, to come here to Toronto. When that happens, that nourishes the whole ecosystem in creative technology. The gamers here, the crowds here, the sponsors, the content creators who can create live broadcast content from the arena, all of that, it lifts up the whole ecosystem, including community and varsity teams and so on. And that all feeds these creative industries. As with film, we did a barriers to access study for labor market and another study addressing labor demand. So now with those two studies that we did this past year, we're really well positioned to design effective economic workforce development programs for these industries. We've also done a lot of professional development and celebration of these industries because a lot of people don't know what kind of excellence and activity happens in Toronto related to these industries. Montreal, as an example, does a brilliant job of celebrating these industries and of using them to express their cultural voice and to attract tourism. These are industries that are powerhouses. So putting them on a platform that allows other people to see how Toronto is excelling here is really important for drawing business, for drawing investment, and also for drawing collaboration inside these industries, pulling people together. And that's going to be really critical to how we see the future of supporting creative industries going forward. So next I want to talk about the visitor economy, because what I'm trying to get to is how all these industries kind of fit together in a creative industry bundle. So, yep, next slide, perfect. So last year in Toronto, we had 26.5 million travelers and a direct spend of $8 billion. This is really important because look at these numbers. They spent $877 million on entertainment. That includes culture, attractions, all of that. Over and above that, they spent $1.2 billion on retail and $2 billion on dining. So what does that mean? It means Toronto has more vitality, more cultural attractions, getting investment from people who come to visit. We have more vibrancy on our streets because we're a city of 3 million people. I checked it this morning because I thought, aren't we more? But I checked it this morning. We're 3.01, whatever, depending on who you talk to. A city of 3 million, but with 26.5 million visitors making financial investment when they come into the city, making so much of what makes Toronto extraordinary available to residents. So how do we support the visitor economy? One of the key things about the visitor economy and the tourists to Toronto is we want to make sure we're really leveraging that inward investment to spread it across the city as much as we can. So one of the ways that the visitor economy aligns with the culture plan is it says culture everywhere. And we want to support that by getting visitors out everywhere to see what's going on all across the city. That's a very intentional piece of the visitor economy. We use it to benefit locals first. We think of it as regenerative tourism, tourism that leaves the destination stronger rather than leaving it depleted. And we've seen what happens in cities like Barcelona when there's excessive tourism or tourism applied in perhaps a less ideal way. So we look at how we can use tourism to advance city strategies like Culture Everywhere or workforce development. We also use tourism to build local industry. So that's where esports and tourism really align as being mutually beneficial because tourism benefits the local creative technology industries. Next slide. For all of the strengths of these industries, for all that they contribute to the city creatively, economically, there are huge challenges here. I can't say what study because I was privileged to see it on a private basis, but a trade organization based locally that is a national organization that works in and amongst these sectors that has companies, creative industry companies as members, identified that only 7% of those companies are actually financially sustainable. That's a very serious problem for these sectors. Film is facing some very serious headwinds right now. There is a very serious downturn in production, plus the industries just survived the strikes and COVID. So there is a high degree of precarity regarding these industries at the moment. The fundamentals are very strong, but they've had 3 big hits in a row rather than just one, so recovery is imperiled. And we are currently facing serious challenges regarding retaining workforce and studio space. Competing jurisdictions offer higher tax credits, whether for creative industries or for film and television. So that's a competitive challenge, very serious. And on the music side, as important as live music venues are, which I just explained to you, we've lost 13 landmark live music venues recently. Now, I've told you how we're trying to combat some of these things, but as we think about creative industries, we think about leveraging these things together so that they can be stronger than the sum of their parts. So next slide, please. We want to look at how it all fits together. As we look forward, one thing that we are really emphasizing in workforce development is given that film, I'll just give you an example of how creative industries fit together. Given that film is currently contracting, what can we do to keep investment? What can we do to protect jobs? What can we do to ensure that there's a future here when the orders rebound, because we know they will? Well, the workforce we're going to be doing going forward will focus on one part of it. We'll focus on training in real time, and specifically Unity and Unreal, because these are foundational softwares, and they can be used for immersive technology, video game development, VFX, game development, and so on. So by training people in these technologies, it gives them room to migrate across all creative industries with transferable skills. So we're building up a dimensional workforce. We're also using land use to enable more studio builds, to protect music venues, to protect for hotels, because we need more hotels here to draw more business here, access to city-owned space. And as we look forward, and next slide and last slide, we look at like, what is the future of creative industries here? One of the things that's happening is the silos are melting. The way that the individual industries used to be produced and distributed was previously quite discrete and quite siloed. Those silos are melting now, and what we need to do is build creative incubators that allow these industries to work together in a much more intentional way, so that we can look at how music can be used in games, how games can become the IP for films, how we're taking podcasts and linking them with publishing. Whatever it is, we need to respond to the fluidity of IP and the tools that technology gives us to ensure that all that creative content is meeting artists in a way that strengthens our economy, our jobs, and our creative vibrancy. So I will end it there. Thank you very much.
Wow, just so incredible to understand both how the city is really working to manage change and also the dynamism and vibrancy of those industries. So we have some time now for questions. I have a whole series, of course, but I actually want to privilege questions from the students, both online and in the room. These were amazingly rich presentations. Okay, the hands are popping up. We'll start with you.
Hi, I just wanted to ask a question about the right to augment your own city. Like, do you guys believe that like Torontonians have the right to like augment their own city in terms of like protests that have like art lenses, like Red Dress Day, or films on publicly made land, or like graffiti or music events held on publicly owned land? Like, how do you foster that like augmentation and creativity within individuals?
Happy to start. I love the language that you use there. So one of the pieces that I think is an important part of how we envision culture everywhere and for all is the idea of animating public realm spaces within the city. Whether that's our civic squares, whether that's parks, streets, and those things happen. One of the things that we do through our funding mechanisms is support that type of expression and growth. But we often are approached in terms of that great square, which is right in front of us, Nathan Phillips Square, and how that might be animated and how we might use that. And that's something that we support. We have a group within our team that looks at that in particular. So I'll start with that. Maybe Marguerite or.
Yeah, it's an interesting question and a complex one. And I like Adirondacq, I really appreciate your language of augmenting the city. And of course, we want to create a place for that. And so I look at initiatives that I haven't discussed because it's a big initiative and there was 20 minutes and I didn't want to go down that rabbit hole. But the night economy is a huge initiative that we're leading out of the Visitor Economy Office, where we're trying to create more vibrancy across Toronto in the other 9 to 5. And so there have been changes to licensing and to zoning that will allow, one of the things I referred to is more performance space in restaurants and so on, more nightclubs outside the core and all of that. But we're also looking into safety and transportation at night and all of these things. And the reason why I'm giving you that example is because I'm trying to draw a picture where you can see that the city is creating the conditions for your creativity to engage. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to make the bucket, and it's up to you to fill it.
Katerina, just for you to pick this up, some of it is how public art is defined and how temporary it is and how permanent, what forms are supported by the city and whatnot. So if you could just talk about that a bit.
Absolutely. Well, you can't have public spaces without community. It's the reason they're built. In my role with the city, because our funding is through construction dollars, all of the artworks we commission have to last in public space for over 30 years. So the pieces I'm working with are made with industrial materials rather than some of the other groups in our division that work with more ephemeral, temporary murals and other kind of like temporary activations. But just saying that community involvement is very important in the work that I do. We always like to partner with local community members and organizations to ensure that they're telling us what they want in their communities. And I think the examples of like Little Portugal are really key there, that you wouldn't put a rooster in any other area of the city. So just allowing the community to dictate how those public spaces are formed and augmented in my case, in a permanent way.
Yeah, it's interesting, and some of the evolution of street art TO was to help to support graffiti artists actually becoming artists who were commissioned and paid, including to do graffiti aesthetic-based work, but as artists that were more formally engaged with the city. So, and other cities have done that too, which is interesting. Other hands. Oh, there you go.
Hi. So originally I had this question for Ms. Akande, but I guess this could be for anyone. So given how this city is prioritizing expanding culture and making it available to everyone, how is the cultural action plan and I guess your own individual opinion responded to the province and Premier Doug Ford's increasing measures to remove and privatize cultural centers such as the Ontario Science Centre and Ontario Place?
The elephant in the room. Off you go.
Just an easy question. So I mean, I think that, you know, one of the pieces that we look at in the plan is the issue of retaining cultural space. Our definition of, or our abilities as a city, as you would be aware, are framed within the context of those provincial elements such as the planning framework and the provincial policy statement, and I promise I won't go into the world of urban planning any deeper than that. Those, of course, impact how we can deal with certain spaces, particularly those that are held by the province. I think there are a number of important spaces, though, that might be held in different ways. And I'm thinking of the work that was done recently by the University of Toronto Infrastructure Institute in looking at cultural centers and how cultural centers existed across the city and their points of evolution. And I raise that because there are a number of different ways that cultural space comes together and is retained. And partnerships and looking at different communities is a key component of that. And we are supportive of that in the work that we're doing directly with the culture plan, but in the work we're doing in partnership with other divisions and in partnership with communities. You know, I think there's work happening, for example, in Jane Finch in terms of creating a new community hub in partnership with working deeply with the city, but that's very much held in the community type of initiative. So I think there are different sources that are important to making sure that we both build but also preserve our landscape, our cultural landscape.
Thank you. Other questions? Oh, there you go.
I have a microphone, but...
No, you need a microphone. One is coming towards you at this very moment.
So my question is, how is the city's strategy for like cultural hubs and public art areas facing the challenges of gentrification and pressures of urban development and rising property values?
So I can start on that. I mean, certainly the issue of just costs and property values and escalations is something that we heard about a lot in our engagement related to the culture plan. One of the mechanisms that we do use and have used and will continue to use is the development process. So as new developments come on stream, being able to identify spaces that might work for cultural use and having those conversations proactively with our colleagues in city planning, with our colleagues in other parts of this the city, our colleagues in CreateTO, our Build Corporation, and also having those conversations with the private sector and developers, understanding that we are interested in working in partnership with some of the new action and development that's happening in the city, and see culture and cultural space as a key component to a complete community. We worked with our colleagues in our social development, finance, and administration, which is basically our social community focused group, where I used to work actually, and city planning and developers with the new development in the Downsview area, and created a community development plan, which helps to articulate how over time, as that area develops, community space will come online, cultural space will come online, parks and recreation space. So being proactive is a part of it, and seeing the ways that our tools can be used to help to stave off the negative impacts of change.
And I would just add some thoughts to that as well, which is when you look at something like film studios, like there are not jobs in film production, physical production in film, without film studios in Toronto, full stop. Film studios happen, they are built on core employment lands. Toronto used to have 13% core employment lands, now we're closer to 11%. We're losing employment lands. That means we lose space for studios and for other industries like that. That's very challenging. So protecting employment lands is a foundational piece of how we protect the film industry going forward. That's embedded in the economic action plan very particularly, with a lot of strength there. And also there are other things that we can look at, like we look at, you know, you're talking about the paucity of space. We're looking at changing the policy around multi-use. So can a space be used for more than one use? And that policy is held at the provincial level, but we're working with the building consultant. Toronto Building is actually doing that work with a consultant. So there are all kinds of different ways. You know, for music venues, we're also looking at the creative co-location tax subclass, which gives them like a tax benefit that makes it more affordable for them to stay. So there are a whole bunch of tools that we can employ to try to preserve or create that space. But I do want to acknowledge your fundamental point about affordability, because Toronto, at the issue of affordability in terms of just living here, is a challenge for every single creative sector. And that's a challenge that is bigger than just economic development and culture and bigger than just the City of Toronto, but affordability definitely is a very foundational challenge.
I kind of have two competing answers for this question, because based on how our public art commissioning processes are set up with the City of Toronto, we are really reliant on new development and capital construction investment. That's where we get our budgets, it's where we get our funding. So again, we depend on new development for this funding. But then on the other side of it, we're in the business of making art more accessible. We're putting public spaces together that don't have admission costs, that don't have certain business hours. It's areas of the city that you can access at all times. And one example is a downtown park that my team's working on. And as part of the development of that park, we're creating a permanent, almost amphitheater style element to the park. So this is something that community groups could use for movie nights or performances and stuff like that. So while we are using it's both sides of the sword, right? You're using the money of the development and the gentrification, but hopefully using it in a way that is benefiting the community and creating more access to the arts for the community.
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, I live near Christie Pitts, and it's one of those really vital parks in the city of Toronto where there's constant film and other kinds of cultural activity. We have time for one more maybe brief question, and then we're going to go to the students and their responses. But, oh, okay, over there. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it has to be very brief, and then like 10-second responses. The firing line.
My question is pretty brief. So we always talk about the starving artist and how art is kind of created through suffering in some cynical way. You know, like real culture comes from, I think, from where I come from, real culture comes from oppression. And oppression can come in various forms. And well, my question is, how can the City of Toronto balance this incentivizing art through money, but keeping it authentic at the same time? Like, we want culture that is real. We want culture that reflects the city, that actually reflects people's struggles, because that's usually what art conveys, people's struggles. That's why we create art, to process our struggles and to process our problems. And how can the city like make sure that this stays authentic while also making sure that artists like have enough to eat at the end of the day?
Well, don't worry. The Arts Council wants a heck of a lot more than we're currently getting. So we're still quite underfunded compared to where we'd like to go. So I can assure you on that one. But Adirondacke, over to you.
Yeah, I do think that, you know, affordability is really a key piece, that we're trying to ensure that artists still have a place and creatives still have a place within the city. And we don't, you know, I don't kid myself that the level of funding is such that it's luxurious, but sufficient that people can afford to stay here should they choose to be here, and really be able to practice their crafts. And some of that is about connectivity. I think there are more ways that we are leveraging the power and benefit of the city than just through funds.
Thank you. Great answer. And we're going to go to our students. They have 2 minutes each to sum up. So Zenaida Desravines, over to you.
So on behalf of OCAD-U, we say thank you to Adirondacke, Katrina, and Marguerite for taking the time to come here today and educating us on the city strategies to support and improve arts and culture. Adirondacke, you dived into the Culture Connects plan, acknowledging the access and equity challenges in the culture sector. The 4 goals of culture everywhere, for all, the future, and beyond borders is a solid plan we hope to see succeed. Katrina, you discussed the role public art plays in contributing to the vibrancy of the city. Despite the challenges of placing new art, we hope to see more support in the future from the city. Marguerite, you highlighted the importance of film, music, and creative tech industries to Toronto's economy and creation of new jobs. We are looking forward to how these industries can continue to grow, supporting our city. Thank you again for your informative presentations on the development of Toronto's culture. I hope to participate in future cultural experiences.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And Nora, last student word to you.
Hi. Firstly, I would like to extend my heartfelt thanks to Professor Sarah Diamond for giving me the opportunity to speak today. I would also like to express my gratitude to our wonderful presenters for their exceptional insights. A special thank you to Adirondacke Akonde, Katrina Campitelli, and Marguerite Pigot for taking time out of your busy schedules to share your expertise on vital topics of arts, culture, and community resilience. Your thought-provoking and thorough presentations have deeply inspired me, and I'm sure I speak for everyone in this room when I say that we are all now more motivated to support the developments of arts in Toronto. Arts and culture are often overlooked, yet they are some of the most important elements that make the city vibrant, dynamic, and an exciting place to live, work, and visit. Without art and design, Toronto would not be as cohesive or internationally recognized as it is today. Moreover, Art serves as a powerful reflection of Toronto's cultural diversity, showcasing the city's welcoming spirit to people from all walks of life. By promoting the arts across the city, we offer artists a platform to share their unique life experiences, raising awareness of issues that matter most to our communities. I believe that when art is accessible to all, it plays a crucial role in enhancing mental health and overall well-being, ultimately contributing to a happier and healthier city. This in turn can help reduce illness and foster a more joyful, connected Toronto, one that lead by example on the world stage. As students, we are the next generation entrusted with the responsibility of shaping Toronto's future. It is our duty to contribute to making the city even more vibrant and dynamic as it is today by actively supporting the continued development of arts. Thank you again for all of the presenters for your informative and enlightening presentations today.
Those are just beautiful notes to end on. So thank you so much, everyone. We look forward to seeing you at our upcoming sessions. Our next session will be in Council Chambers on November 22nd, Mobility, Transportation, and Climate Action, possibly with a special guest. Thanks again, everyone. By the way, any university students who don't have a mate yet for their assignment, please come up to the front afterwards and we're going to try and matchmake you. A big round of applause to our speakers. Thank you.